Imagine a quiet farm town, a struggling single dad desperate for a fresh start, and a mysterious woman hiding a secret worth millions. Grady Armstrong came to Sweetwater Valley seeking nothing more than a paycheck to support his young son, Jonah. But what began as a simple barn repair soon revealed shocking secrets buried deep within the farmland, secrets powerful enough to shake the entire town. When Grady discovers hidden documents linking the reserved Rosemary Walker to a ruthless land developer, a fierce battle ensues, testing their courage, trust, and sense of justice. Will Grady risk it all to protect Rosemary and save the farm from corporate greed? Can Rosemary confront her family's hidden past and keep the legacy alive? This is a dramatic, heart-pounding story about honor, redemption, and second chances, filled with twists as gripping as your favorite John Wayne classic. Pour yourself a fresh cup of coffee, settle into your favorite armchair, and get ready for a showdown you won't forget. And don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories like this one. Grady Armstrong cut the engine of his aging pickup truck and sat for a moment gripping the steering wheel as dust settled around him. This was the first morning he and his 7-year-old son Jonah would wake up in the small 2-bedroom rental on the edge of Sweetwater Valley. Grady had taken odd jobs in countless towns, drifting from place to place ever since Jonah's mother passed away in an accident 4 years earlier. But something about Sweetwater drew him in differently. Perhaps it was the wide open spaces or the quiet hush of its autumn mornings. Or maybe it was just that he was tired. Tired of running. Tired of restless nights spent staring at motel ceilings. They'd arrived the previous night under a moonlit sky, still unsure if this stay would be temporary like the others. Yet for Jonah's sake, Grady wanted to hope it would be more permanent. He exhaled and turned to check on Jonah, who was fast asleep, curled in a blanket on the passenger seat. He gently ruffled his son's tousled brown hair. "Wake up, bud," he said softly. "New day, new place." Jonah stirred, yawned, and blinked at the early light filtering through the truck's windshield. A tiny grin spread across the boy's face. Jonah always managed to find excitement in the smallest details, like the way dew sparkled on a broken fence, or how morning sunbeams slid across a muddy driveway. Grady pulled the door handle, stepping out into the crisp air that smelled faintly of hay and wood smoke. The small rental house in front of them had peeling paint, a sagging porch, and a few scraggly bushes out front. But it was cheap and, more importantly, close to the job he had lined up. 3 days before, a woman named Rosemary Walker had called in response to an ad Grady had posted online, offering handyman and carpentry services. She mentioned needing a barn repaired quickly, adding she could not pay much, just enough to cover a few weeks of groceries and rent. Grady had learned over years of drifting that one decent job could keep him afloat until the next. And for all he knew, maybe this small farm job was the start of some stability. Jonah hopped down onto the gravel, squinting toward the newly discovered horizon. "Dad, do you think there's treasure here?" he asked, his voice brimming with curiosity. "Treasure," Grady echoed, stretching. "I'm sure there's something worth finding." He wasn't talking about gold or jewels. He was talking about a place to finally let Jonah plant roots. In the back of his mind, he remembered his own childhood spent on his grandfather's property for a few blissful summers, building forts in dusty barns and splashing in trickling creeks. Maybe Jonah deserved something like that too. With Jonah trailing alongside him, Grady moved to unload a few boxes. Their first day in Sweetwater stretched out before them, wide as the farmland, rolling beyond the distant hills. There was a barn somewhere up the road waiting to be mended, and a farmer he had never met who might just change their lives, though. Grady could never have guessed how deeply. Later that morning, Grady steered the pickup down a winding country road, following the directions Rosemary had provided over the phone. He couldn't help but admire the scenery: gently rolling fields of golden wheat, dusty roads flanked by maple trees dressed in red and orange, the sky above an unbroken dome of pale blue. Jonah leaned forward in his seat, hands pressed against the glass as he watched the farmland unfold like a living storybook. The farmland was apparently large. Rosemary had said her family owned multiple acres passed down through several generations. Grady pictured a modest farm, maybe a single silo, and a barn needing more nails than lumber. He had no idea the scope of what lay ahead. When they arrived at the Walker property, Grady's eyebrows lifted in surprise. Although not ostentatious, the farm was sizable. An old 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch sat at the center of a sweeping acreage. A faded wooden barn stood to one side, its once red paint now chipped and peeling. Rotted boards formed holes in the siding, and the roof sagged ominously in a few spots. Horses grazed in a distant pasture, and a meandering fence line indicated the land stretched even farther than the eye could see. Rosemary was waiting by the barn, arms crossed, her posture straight. She was tall and lean, her hair a deep auburn pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore worn jeans with boots caked in dirt. There was a quiet confidence in her stance, like someone who'd weathered storms and still stood tall, even if she carried an unspoken heaviness in her expression. Grady climbed out of the truck, motioning for Jonah to stay close. He noticed Rosemary watching them with a mixture of curiosity and reserve. "You must be Mrs. Walker," he said, stepping forward to offer a handshake. She took his hand, nodding curtly. "Rosemary, and you're Grady Armstrong." "I take it, yes, ma'am. And this here is my son, Jonah," Grady said, placing a hand on Jonah's shoulder. "Thanks for the opportunity. I'm eager to see what we're dealing with." Jonah wandered a few steps away, finding interest in an overturned wheelbarrow. Meanwhile, Rosemary walked Grady toward the barn. The structure looked even more precarious up close. Sections of the roof had holes big enough to let in both sunlight and rain, and sections of the plank siding were rotting from years of neglect. Grady felt the old boards under his palm, mentally calculating how many sheets of lumber might be needed, how many hours of labor, and what it would cost. He glanced at Rosemary. "It's in rough shape," he observed gently. "But I've worked on worse. As long as the foundation's not too far gone, I think we can fix it up." Rosemary nodded, crossing her arms again. "I'd like that. This barn belonged to my late father and grandfather before him. I can't just let it collapse on itself." She looked away for a second, her voice growing softer. "I owe them that much." Grady wanted to ask more, but decided not to pry. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves, determined to prove that this job, small or large, would be done right. Jonah's delighted squeal echoed over the farmyard as he ran toward an unexpected surprise. A scruffy, honey-colored dog trotting near the porch steps of the farmhouse. The dog's ears perked up at Jonah's approach, as if deciding whether to greet this newcomer. After a short, suspenseful moment, the dog wagged its tail in a tentative welcome. From where Grady and Rosemary stood, the sight of Jonah kneeling, the dog licking his outstretched hand, was enough to make them both smile. "That's Barley," Rosemary explained, her arms dropping to her sides as she allowed a more relaxed posture. "He showed up about a year ago, half-starved and limping. I didn't have the heart to turn him away. Seems he's decided this place is home." Jonah looked back at his father with hopeful eyes. "Dad, can I play with him?" "Please," Grady shrugged. "That's up to Ms. Walker. This is her land." Rosemary gave Jonah a nod. "Of course. Just be careful near the pastures, all right?" As Jonah and Barley set off on an exploratory mission round the side of the house, Grady couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude toward Rosemary. Many property owners were quick to shoot children and animals away, but she seemed to welcome the burst of energy Jonah brought with him. It reminded Grady of what a farm could mean, a sense of belonging, a place where no one was turned away. Shifting the focus back to the barn, Grady walked around its perimeter with Rosemary taking notes on a small notepad he kept for such jobs. He jotted down the measurements in any places where the structural integrity was most in danger. Occasionally, Rosemary added a comment: which section had collapsed during the last heavy storm, which part of the roof was the oldest, and how the interior beams had been replaced once long ago by her grandfather. She spoke about her father in careful pieces, as if each memory was a fragile heirloom. "So your father expanded the farm, right?" Grady asked, recalling something she mentioned during their phone call. "You have quite a bit of land." Rosemary nodded. "He poured his heart into it. We used to have more farm hands back in the day, but after he got sick, the finances started unraveling. By the time he passed, I was left to manage things on my own. I've been trying to hold it together ever since." Grady heard the unspoken weight in her words. He recognized that same note of fatigue in his own reflection, sometimes like someone bracing against storms that wouldn't quit. This job might be more than just nailing boards and patching holes. Maybe it was an unexpected chance for both of them to rebuild something they thought they'd lost. Early the next day, Grady woke to the sound of birds chirping and Jonah rummaging in the small kitchen of their rental. A box of cereal rattled, and Jonah poured himself a bowl brimming with the anticipation of exploring Rosemary's farm again. The boy's eagerness reminded Grady of the excitement he himself once had as a child. For a moment, Grady paused, letting the distant memory of simpler times wash over him. Despite the early hour, they headed out to the Walker property. Grady wanted to make a real dent in the barn repairs before the midday heat. To his surprise, Rosemary was already by the barn, hauling a toolbox nearly as big as she was. She wore a determined expression and sweat glistened at her temples, even though the sun had barely cleared the treetops. "I told you I'd help," she said almost defensively, As Grady approached to take the heavy toolbox from her. "I might not be a skilled carpenter, but I can hold a hammer." He laughed, not unkindly. "I appreciate the enthusiasm. Just don't push yourself too hard. That box is no joke." Rosemary set her hands on her hips, looking at the barn's battered frame. "I'm done waiting for things to fix themselves." She motioned for Grady to unlock the barn door, and together they stepped into the dust-laden interior. Shafts of golden light broke through cracks in the roof. Overhead, the rafters sagged. Grady's mind whirred, weighing how best to reinforce the roof and whether the side beams needed total replacement. Jonah and Barley soon poked their heads inside. "Dad, can I climb the ladder?" Jonah asked, pointing to an old wooden ladder leaning against a stack of hay bales. Grady fixed him with a playful sternness. "That ladder looks older than me." "Kiddo, let me check it first." He tested a rung and was relieved to find it sturdier than expected, but not something Jonah should clamber up unsupervised. "Let's keep both feet on the ground for now." While Rosemary and Grady worked measuring new boards, tearing out rotten planks, Jonah raced around the property with Barley filling the air with shouts of discovery whenever he stumbled upon an interesting bug or an oddly shaped rock. Occasionally, Rosemary paused to glance at the boy, a small smile tugging at her lips as though his excitement brought color to an otherwise gray world. By late morning, the sun hung overhead, and the interior of the barn turned warm and stuffy. Grady wiped his brow and glanced at Rosemary, who had just finished helping secure a patch of flooring near the barn's entrance. "You want to take a break?" he suggested, seeing her breathe hard from exertion. She hesitated but nodded. Sometimes taking a break wasn't just about physical rest. It was about letting yourself remember that life could hold more than just responsibility. Grady was beginning to think Rosemary needed that reminder as much as he did. They settled under the shade of a large oak near the farmhouse, gulping water from thermoses. Jonah and Barley joined them, plopping down in the grass. For a few minutes, the group breathed in unison, gazing at the wind-blown fields of wheat in front of them. The picturesque view was almost enough to make one forget the responsibilities that loomed. Jonah began fiddling with a few dandelions, blowing the seeds and letting them drift on the light breeze. "Dad," he said, turning toward Grady, "did we ever live on a farm before?" Grady smiled wistfully, realizing Jonah had no direct memories of his mother's childhood home. "A smaller farm in a different state. Not really, buddy, but for a few months after you were born, we stayed at your grandpa's place up north. You were too little to remember." Rosemary listened quietly, sipping her water. She had asked Grady very few personal questions so far, and he had asked her just as few. Now a flicker of curiosity passed over her face. "So you have some farm experience?" A little, Grady admitted. "Spent summers helping my granddad bale hay, fix fences." "Nothing official, just extra hands. But after Jonah's mom passed, I started drifting. A stable job here, a contract job there. I didn't want to be tied down." Rosemary glanced at Jonah, who was now rolling in the grass with Barley. "Must be hard raising him on your own." "It is," Grady said, a tightness in his throat. "But he's a good kid." She said nothing to that, merely nodding. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but weighty with the acknowledgement of shared burdens. Then Jonah scrambled up and picked a small, half-crushed wildflower. "Ms. Walker," he asked, jogging over to her, "do you know if there's a place with a pond or a creek around here?" "Barley and I found some tracks. We think are from raccoons, but maybe it's something bigger." Rosemary accepted the drooping flower as though it were a precious gift. "There's a creek that runs along the back edge of the property. My grandfather used to fish there sometimes. Though it's mostly shallow water now. You can explore, but don't go too far." "All right," Jonah's eyes lit up. "Yes, ma'am." In a burst of energy, he dashed off, Barley bounding after him. Grady shook his head affectionately. "He's going to wear himself out by dinner." Rosemary shrugged, her posture slowly relaxing. "Let him be a kid while he can." She said, a subtle hint of sadness in her voice, as if remembering when she had once been that carefree. The two adults lingered a moment longer in companionable silence, each of them knowing there was still much work to do, both on the barn and on the scars neither spoke of. By late afternoon, they returned to the barn, determined to patch more of the roof. Grady set up a stable ladder on the outside near the eaves, carrying a hammer, nails, and fresh shingles. The climb was steep and the wood precariously old, but if the barn was to last through another storm, these repairs were essential. Rosemary stayed at the base, bracing the ladder and occasionally handing up tools. "This barn," she said, raising her voice so Grady could hear, "it was built by my grandfather. He had big dreams. Then my father inherited the place and tried to turn it into a larger operation, bigger fields, more livestock, new technology. But it all came to a halt when she trailed off, letting the sentence dangle. Grady looked down at her, pausing his hammer mid-strike. When he got sick, he offered gently. She nodded, swallowing. He wanted to leave me something that would keep our family name going, you know? But the hospital bills, the endless fees, well, I was left with an enormous debt. I've spent the last 2 years negotiating with lenders, dealing with realtors who want me to sell parcels of land. And some of these people, they're not above using pressure tactics. He resumed hammering, carefully pressing a new shingle into place. You're not looking to sell, though, right? She exhaled, glancing over at the fields. No, absolutely not. This land is all I have left of him. Letting it go would feel like betrayal. Grady understood that in a way he couldn't fully explain. He'd spent years drifting because every place reminded him of his wife. But he also knew the worth of memories that lingered in every corner of land and wood. I get it, he said simply. Just then, Jonah poked his head around the corner of the barn, sporting a grin that brightened his dirt-smudged face. Hey, Dad. Ms. Walker told me there's an apple orchard on the other side of the house, Barley. And I found it. The apples taste awesome. He held up a half-eaten apple, fresh juice dripping off his chin. Rosemary smiled softly. Those trees have been there forever. We never get around to picking them all. An idea sparked in Grady's mind, but he filed it away for now, focusing on driving the last nail into the new shingle. Once it was secure, he carefully climbed down, muscles aching in protest. All right, he said, turning to Rosemary. That should hold for tonight, but there's still a lot of work left. Roof repairs, reinforcing beams. Maybe repainting if we can swing it. She sighed, weary but resolute. Whatever it takes. This barn matters more than people realize. He nodded, brushing dust off his worn jeans. I'll do right by it and by you. He glanced in Jonah's direction, then back at Rosemary. It's nice to stay in one place for a change, he added quietly. Something flickered in Rosemary's expression. Relief or perhaps gratitude. Either way, it was an acknowledgement that for the first time in a long while, she wasn't facing this alone. And Grady realized, perhaps for the first time, he didn't mind the idea of laying down roots here in this unexpected refuge. Over the next few days, the barn repairs became a steady rhythm in Grady's life. Each morning, he and Jonah rose early, ate a quick breakfast of scrambled eggs or cereal, then headed to the Walker farm to put in another full day of labor. The weather was mostly cooperative, cool mornings that warmed with the midday sun, but rarely scorched. Jonah split his time between trailing after his father and pestering Rosemary with questions about farm life, occasionally bounding off with Barley to discover every nook and cranny on the property. At first, Rosemary seemed hesitant about Jonah's unbridled curiosity, possibly concerned that he might break something or stumble into trouble. Yet day by day, she relaxed. It was hard to remain guarded against a child's awe. She even taught Jonah how to check for fresh eggs in a small chicken coop she kept behind the farmhouse. The boy nearly burst with excitement each time he gently placed a still warm egg in the basket, reporting his success to Grady with shining eyes. Meanwhile, Grady tackled each barn issue systematically. He replaced rotten boards in the walls, measured beams for stability, and carefully planned how to install new support rafters beneath the aging roof. One afternoon, Rosemary insisted on helping him lift a particularly large section of lumber. He worried she might strain her back, but she managed to hold her own sweaty brow furrowed in concentration. When the beam was finally in place, they exchanged triumphant smiles, a silent recognition of teamwork forged in sawdust and elbow grease. During these stretches of work, Grady noticed that Rosemary rarely spoke about her own challenges unless prompted. She'd drop small hints, a passing reference to debts, a frustrated remark about corporate letters that showed up in her mailbox, but then she'd clamp her mouth shut. Grady didn't push for details. He knew from personal experience that sometimes when burdens weighed heavy, you either poured them out all at once or hid them for fear of drowning everyone around you. Despite Rosemary's attempts to keep her struggles hidden, Grady couldn't help but sense a growing tension beneath her calm exterior. She'd caught him reading her expression a few times, and each time she changed the subject, it reminded him of how he used to evade well-intentioned questions about Jonah's mother, wanting to spare them all from the raw grief. By the time Friday rolled around, the barn's condition had markedly improved. Fresh boards replaced broken ones, new nails gleamed, and the shape of a once-rotten structure took on renewed life. That evening, as Grady and Jonah packed their tools into the truck, Rosemary quietly approached, offering an unexpected invitation. Dinner at her farmhouse that Sunday. I make decent pie, she added almost shyly, as if worried they might refuse. But Jonah's enthusiastic yes, please sealed the deal. Grady nodded, smiling gently. Sounds perfect. Sunday arrived with a sense of warmth that belied the late autumn calendar date. The sky was vivid blue, and sunlight spilled across the farmland like liquid gold. Jonah had raced around the rental house for hours, pestering Grady with questions about dinner. Is Ms. Walker going to make chicken or maybe roast beef? Can we bring something? Should I wear a tie? The boy seemed more excited about a home-cooked meal than any holiday. Grady, for his part, felt a mixture of anticipation and unease. In all the drifting years, he rarely found himself invited into someone's home. It was simpler to keep people at arm's length, safer to leave before attachments formed. But in Sweetwater, it became increasingly harder to maintain that distance, thanks to Jonah's immediate fondness for Rosemary. And if he was honest, his own growing respect for her, they arrived at the farm just before sunset. The evening light gave the fields a soft glow. Rosemary stood on the porch in a patterned apron, hair pulled back in a loose ponytail that caught the gentle breeze. She waved them inside, motioning toward a rustic kitchen full of comforting aromas. Something savory simmering on the stove, the sweet scent of pastry wafting from the oven. Barley, ever the friendly gatekeeper, greeted Jonah with an excited bark-tail wagging. Hope you're hungry, Rosemary said, offering Grady a small smile. I might have made more than we can eat. I'm always hungry, Jonah announced proudly, already sliding into a wooden chair at the farmhouse table. Grady chuckled, taking a seat as Rosemary brought out a pitcher of freshly pressed apple cider. The table was set with simple, sturdy dishes, the kind that carry stories through generations. Steaming bowls of mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, and a spiced chicken dish lined the center. Grady felt a pang of gratitude he hadn't experienced in a while. This was not just a meal, it was a gesture as they ate. Jonah filled the space with chatter about the chickens, the orchard, and the wonders of farm life. Rosemary listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that fueled Jonah's enthusiasm. Grady quietly watched the interplay, struck by how at ease his son was. Then again, Jonah adapted quickly wherever they went. It was Grady who found it difficult to let his guard down. After dinner, Rosemary surprised them with a homemade apple pie, perfectly golden. Jonah let out a dramatic sigh of delight, and Grady, tasting the first bite, closed his eyes. That's fantastic, he murmured. It tasted like nostalgia, like warmth and family. It reminded him of the last time he'd eaten homemade pie years ago before his wife's accident turned his world on end. When the plates were cleared and the conversation lulled, Rosemary's gaze wandered to a set of faded photographs hanging on the wall near the stairway. Grady followed her gaze, glimpsing black and white images of a man in overalls, presumably her grandfather, and a younger man wearing a broad-brimmed hat that might have been her father. He sensed a story there waiting to be told. They moved to the living room, where the light of a single lamp bathed the worn furniture in a soft glow. Jonah dozed off on an armchair, exhausted from the day's adventures. Barley lay curled at his feet, equally content. Grady sat across from Rosemary, noticing how she fidgeted with the hem of her apron, as though trying to decide whether to speak. Finally, she cleared her throat. I appreciate you both coming over. It's been a while since I've cooked a meal to share. This house hasn't felt like a home for a long time, Grady nodded, meeting her gaze. It's a good home, and that dinner was amazing, thank you. Rosemary looked at Jonah, asleep and peaceful, and her expression softened. He reminds me of myself at that age. Always curious, always finding joy in small wonders. I was raised on this farm, running free through the fields. But when you get older, responsibilities pile on and everything changes. Her voice quieted, thick with unspoken loss. Grady, sensing an opening to ask, spoke softly. Jonah's mom passed away in a car accident. I know the weight of loss, though. I can't say I know yours specifically. But I can recognize the look of carrying burdens alone. She pursed her lips, hugging her arms around herself. My father built this place up from a small homestead into something bigger, expanding fields, upgrading equipment. But he fell ill with a rare condition. Hospital bills mounted. By the time he passed, lenders were circling like vultures. Some acquaintances offered to buy me out. Others acted like they wanted to help, only to push me towards selling. He let her words settle, recalling the chipped exterior of the barn and the quiet perseverance she showed daily. But you never sold, he said, voice low. She shook her head. Couldn't bring myself to let it go. My father spent his last days planning how we'd keep this place thriving. I can't bear to lose everything he worked for, but it's getting harder, especially since... She paused, glancing at a few letters on the nearby coffee table stamped with official-looking seals. A developer named Bradley Lockwood has been pestering me. He uses subtle intimidation calls at odd hours, sends letters that hint at legal battles. He wants to buy the entire acreage and turn it into a commercial site. I keep saying no, but I'm afraid he's building a case to force me out. Grady's brow furrowed. Force you out through what eminent domain? She shrugged. He's well connected. Well, all I know is I can't do this alone much longer. Grady's mind churned with the details. There was more at stake here than a broken barn. For the first time, he recognized just how precarious Rosemary's situation was. He looked at Jonah, then back at Rosemary. You're not alone, he said almost impulsively. Not anymore. On the drive back home that night, Grady kept replaying Rosemary's words. He had come to Sweetwater for temporary work, maybe a chance to catch his breath. Yet in a matter of weeks, he found himself entangled in the battle for Rosemary Walker's ancestral land. She was strong, resilient, really, but he knew too well how quickly finances and legalities could break someone's spirit. Jonah slept in the passenger seat leaning against Barley, who'd insisted on riding along. They'd eventually bring Barley back in the morning, but the dog seemed to enjoy the novelty of an overnight playdate. Grady didn't mind. Jonah had wanted a dog for ages, and seeing them together only highlighted how starved Jonah was for a stable, comforting environment. That night, after tucking Jonah into bed, Grady sat at the small kitchen table, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and flickering fluorescent light. He wanted to help Rosemary to stand by her side. But how he was just a handyman with some carpentry skills scraping by on meager paychecks. The only advantage he had was that he'd seen how people tried to manipulate vulnerable landowners. His uncle had gone through something similar, nearly losing his farmland to developers pushing for a highway extension. Perhaps Grady could recall some of the old strategies to fight back. Monday morning found him groggy but determined. Over coffee, he scanned local newspapers and found references to Lockwood's business dealings in other counties. Always the same pattern. Identify farmland on the brink of financial trouble, buy it at a discounted rate, and then convert it into either commercial real estate or industrial farmland for a big profit. He was good at playing the legal angles before heading to the Walker farm. Grady made a stop in town at the local diner. It was the kind of place that doubled as a community hub, where farmers and small business owners swapped news over biscuits and gravy. He asked the waitress if she knew of anyone who might have tangled with Bradley Lockwood before she directed him to talk to a man named Marcus Henderson. Marcus turned out to be an older gentleman, tall and broad-shouldered, sipping black coffee at the counter. When Grady introduced himself, explaining he was working at Rosemary Walker's place, Marcus's eyes narrowed. Heard about her father's passing, he said softly. Lockwood's been snooping around that property for years. I don't like him, but he's got money and connections. Is there a way to fight him off? Grady asked, tension brimming in his voice. Marcus shrugged. Depends how far he's willing to go. But that Walker farm has a lot of history in Sweetwater. If you can rally the town's sympathy, maybe that'll be enough to keep him at bay at least for a while. Grady left the diner with more questions than answers, but also with a faint glimmer of possibility. Maybe he could help Rosemary do exactly that. Show everyone the true value of the Walker farm. By mid-morning, Grady had arrived at the Walker farm. Jonah ran off to feed the chickens while Grady found Rosemary near the barn, kneeling in the dirt to inspect a row of overgrown planter boxes. She looked up, confusion mingling with curiosity in her eyes. You're late, she noted. Grady offered an apologetic smile. Had a few errands in town? Saw Marcus Henderson. At the mention of Marcus, Rosemary stood wiping dirt from her jeans. Is he still living out near Apple Creek Road? Seems like it, Grady replied. He mentioned something about your father, about how you and your family have a lot of history here. He also said something that got me thinking. If Lockwood tries a legal angle, one of the best defenses is showing how integral your farm is to the community. Rosemary's expression shifted to guarded skepticism. I've tried telling people that. Most folks support me in words, but that doesn't stop Lockwood from wheeling and dealing behind closed doors. Grady shrugged, stepping closer. What if we made it more than words? Turn this place into a hub for the town again, like a weekly market or a small festival. Something that invests people in this land's future. She pursed her lips, glancing at the barn and the wide fields beyond. It's not a bad idea, but how would we pull it off? I'm not exactly flush with cash, Grady. The improvements to the barn alone are straining my budget. Doesn't have to cost much, Grady countered. We can invite local farmers to sell their produce here, crafters to set up booths, maybe feature your orchard apples. People in small towns love a gathering, especially if it's reminiscent of older traditions. If it's a hit, we prove that this farm is more than just land. It's a resource for everyone. Rosemary's gaze flicked to Jonah, who was now bounding across the yard, barley in tow. I remember when I was a kid, we'd host harvest festivals, pumpkin patches, hayrides. My grandfather always believed that if you open your doors to the community, they'll take care of you in return. A flicker of hope illuminated her features, but it was layered with caution. Lockwood won't just back down, but maybe this will buy time, show the town board and the county that forcing a sale isn't in the public interest. Grady placed a hand on her shoulder gently. One step at a time. We finish the barn repairs so it's safe for visitors. Then we plan an event. That's it. She exhaled, tension releasing from her posture. All right, let's do it, but we'll need help. Then let's find help, Grady said simply. Rosemary offered a rare, warm smile. For the first time since he met her, Grady sensed that she was allowing herself to believe that maybe there was a way forward that didn't involve losing everything she held dear. In the following days, the transformation of the Walker farm began in earnest. While Grady continued methodical barn repairs, replacing roof shingles, reinforcing load-bearing beams, Rosemary set about reviving old traditions. She climbed into her dusty attic, retrieving boxes of decorations from past festivals, and rummaging through old records of local vendors who'd once participated in her grandfather's harvest gatherings. Jonah became an unofficial assistant, skipping around with a clipboard Rosemary gave him to take notes. Barley followed at his heels, occasionally running off to chase rabbits or bark at the horses in the distant pasture. The orchard also needed attention. Half the apples had dropped to the ground unused. But with a plan forming, Rosemary started gathering volunteers to pick what was left and store them in the cool shed for potential cider and pies. Grady found himself caught up in the enthusiasm. He never imagined taking on anything beyond the barn's structural repairs. Yet each time Rosemary asked him to help, he found it difficult to say no. Her quiet determination was contagious. Together, they made phone calls to local artisans, old family friends, and even a few orchard owners from neighboring counties who might be willing to bring over pumpkins for a fall-themed event. At first, the responses were tepid. A few folks expressed interest but wouldn't commit. Then a baker named Mabel, owner of the local Sweetwater bakery, voiced her excitement, offering to bring fresh donuts and pastries to a farm stand for free as long as she could set up a table to sell loaves of bread. Another neighbor, a retired teacher, promised to spread the word among families who might bring their children for hayrides. Slowly but steadily, the idea gained traction. One afternoon, after a long day of labor, Grady and Rosemary walked the property line, checking on fence posts that Grady had partially fixed. The conversation drifted between practical details like setting up parking areas for the expected visitors in more personal territory. At one point, Grady mentioned Jonah's struggles in school, how the frequent moving made it hard for him to make friends. Grady pressed his hand lightly against the small of her back. He found himself saying the first comforting thing that came to mind. You've kept so much of this place intact. It's part of you, Rosem. He trailed off, realizing he'd used a familiar shortening of her name for the first time. She turned to him with an unreadable look in her eyes. It means a lot, she finally said, that you're here helping me. Us, Grady nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I'm not going anywhere. The flurry of farm preparations continued, culminating in a sense of cautious optimism. They set the date for a small harvest market just 2 weeks away. During that time, people from Sweetwater trickled in to help, offering everything from setting up tables to fixing the decades-old sign that once read Walker Family Harvest Festival. Even Jonah got in on the creative side, painting bright pictures of pumpkins and apples to hang near the barn's entrance. As the work ramped up, so did Grady's awareness that they were racing a ticking clock. Bradley Lockwood was nowhere to be seen, but they all sensed his presence in the form of letters or calls to the county board, hinting at underutilized land that could be reclaimed for commercial development. Rosemary confided that her father once took out a sizable loan from Lockwood's associates, and she worried about hidden clauses that might give him undue influence. Grady tried to reassure her, though the tension never fully left her eyes. One crisp morning, Grady arrived to find Rosemary pacing near the barn, a letter clenched in her hands. She looked up, relief and apprehension mingling on her face. There's a county council meeting in a week, she said, voice unsteady. Lockwood's petitioning them to consider an economic development plan that includes part of my farmland. Grady set down his toolbox, trying to keep calm for her sake. So he's playing the eminent domain angle. She nodded, her gaze drifting to the wide fields behind them. Calls it progress. Says he can bring jobs, new businesses, better roads. Never mind that it bulldozed decades of history. Jonah, who had overheard, asked quietly, "Dad, does that mean they can just take Ms. Walker's home?" Without missing a beat, Grady shook his head. "We're not letting that happen." Then he turned to Rosemary, determination edging his voice. "If you want to stand up to him, we need a strong case. This harvest market can prove the farm's importance, but we should also bring everyone who cares about the Walker name to that council meeting. Show them you have community backing." Rosemary's shoulders sagged a bit, but the resolve in her eyes shone. "I'll talk to old family friends, see if they'll stand up with me. Maybe we can gather stories of how the farm has helped people in Sweetwater. My grandfather used to let families glean the fields for free when they were short on food." Grady stepped closer, placing a hand gently over hers. "That's the spirit. Once the council sees how vital this place is, they'll think twice." Jonah nudged Grady's arm. "And they'll see how tasty Miss Walker's apple pies are." Rosemary chuckled softly at Jonah's earnest tone, the sound bridging the gap between fear and hope. Sometimes a child's unwavering faith was the best spark to keep them moving forward. The following week was a whirlwind of final touches. A small group of local residents came together, cleaning up debris in the barnyard, decorating tables with checkered cloths and baskets of gourds. Rosemary invested in new strings of lights, hanging them across the beams of the newly repaired barn roof. Grady meticulously ensured every structural improvement met safety standards, so no visitors would risk injury. He found a sense of pride in seeing the battered barn transformed into something welcoming. Mabel from Sweetwater Bakery arrived to set up her stand, the air soon filling with the aroma of cinnamon and rising dough. A local honey producer brought jars of wildflower honey, while a family from a neighboring orchard delivered crates of pumpkins. Jonah raced around helping wherever he could, sweeping the barn floor, corralling barley away from the pastry tables, even painting final signs that read, "Welcome to Walker Farm Harvest Market." That Saturday morning, a light mist hovered over the fields as Grady and Jonah pulled in for the big day. Visitors were already arriving, parking cars along a makeshift road near the fence. Families ambled across the field, children giggling as they spotted the orchard or the newly stacked hay bales that functioned as both seating and decoration. A local band had volunteered to play folksy tunes in a corner of the barn, creating a festive atmosphere. Grady spotted Rosemary near the orchard speaking with an elderly couple who seemed emotional about being back on the Walker land. The couple's son years ago had worked for Rosemary's grandfather. Grady watched as Rosemary listened intently, her hand resting gently on the elderly woman's arm. It was clear that many in Sweetwater carried deep attachments to this farm, attachments that could transform into powerful support when push came to shove. At midday, the event was in full swing. The barn bustled with chatter and laughter, the smell of fresh apple cider mixing with the sweet tang of homemade pies. Children climbed on hay bales under the watchful eyes of their parents, while local artisans sold knitted scarves, carved wooden toys, and jars of jam. Grady found himself grinning from ear to ear, practically disbelieving how much the old barn had come alive. Amid the merriment, he noticed Rosemary quietly wiping a tear from her cheek as she looked around. When she caught his eye, she quickly brushed it away and smiled. Grady's heart swelled with empathy. This was more than just a market. It was a revival of memories and a testament to the land's enduring significance. As the afternoon sun dipped, painting the fields in soft orange light, a hush fell across the gathering. Rosemary climbed onto a small platform near the barn entrance, clearing her throat to address the crowd. Grady, standing beside Jonah, felt a surge of protective pride. She'd come a long way from the reserved woman he first met. Grady found himself caught up in the enthusiasm. He never imagined taking on anything beyond the barn's structural repairs. Yet each time Rosemary asked him to help, he found it difficult to say no. Her quiet determination was contagious. Together they made phone calls to local artisans, old family friends, and even a few orchard owners from neighboring counties who might be willing to bring over pumpkins for a fall-themed event. At first, the responses were tepid. A smattering of applause spread through the barn, mingled with supportive cheers. Jonah clapped enthusiastically. Barley wagging his tail, Grady watched his heart pounding at the significance of this moment. Rosemary continued, "We have a fight on our hands. A well-connected developer wants to see this land repurposed. But I believe in the power of a town that stands together. I believe in my neighbors and each one of you. Today is proof that this farm matters." Her voice shook slightly. So, Pedro, thank you. And please, if you value the legacy of this place, if you want to preserve what Sweetwater stands for, join me at the county council meeting next week. Let's show them what community looks like. The applause was thunderous this time. People rose from bales of hay, hooting and hollering, some calling out Rosemary's name. Grady found himself caught up in the moment, both moved and impressed. He saw in Rosemary the strength that had kept her going, despite the encroaching threats. And now with the crowd's energy behind her, she radiated a resolve that hinted she might just come out on top. As the final notes of the local band's music died away and families began to pack up, an older man with silver hair and a denim jacket approached Grady. He introduced himself as a retired county official who once worked with Rosemary's grandfather. If the council sees this kind of turnout, he said in a gravelly voice, they'll have a hard time siding with Lockwood. Public sentiment goes a long way. Grady nodded, relief flooding him. That's what we're banking on later when the harvest market wound down and the last visitors departed. Grady lingered to help Rosemary dismantle tables and gather leftover produce. Mabel and a few others also stayed chatting about how to make future markets a regular occurrence. The sense of camaraderie was palpable, each person buoyed by the shared success of the day. When dusk finally settled, Rosemary and Grady found themselves standing by the repaired barn door arms loaded with folded chairs. Their gazes swept across the farmyard, now empty of visitors, the fields lit only by the faint glow of moonlight. It's beautiful, Rosemary murmured. I forgot how alive this place could feel. Grady set the chairs down and reached for her hand without overthinking. And it can stay alive, he said. You're doing everything right. She tightened her fingers around his. For once, she didn't hide the tears threatening to spill. I just hope it's enough, she whispered. All the optimism in the world couldn't quiet the knot in Rosemary's stomach as she, Grady, and Jonah walked into the county council building. The following week, the hall was modest, just a long room with rows of seats and a raised dais where 5 council members sat. Yet it felt imposing under the fluorescent lights, the hush of tension in the air, signaling that something crucial was about to unfold. They had arrived early, but not as early as Bradley Lockwood. He stood near the front, his tailored suit pressed and immaculate, radiating the kind of calm confidence that came with wealth and familiarity with such proceedings. He glanced back, catching Rosemary's eye before shifting his gaze dismissively to Grady and Jonah. Don't let him intimidate you, Grady, whispered, placing a reassuring hand on Rosemary's arm. She nodded, swallowing hard. Slowly, residents of Sweetwater began filing in, some older couples. The orchard owners Mabel from the bakery, Marcus Henderson, and a handful of other supporters from the harvest market. They filled a good portion of the chairs, offering small and encouraging smiles to Rosemary as they took their seats. Jonah sat next to Barley, who'd snuck inside under the guise of being a service dog, though no one seemed to mind. The council members called the meeting to order. However, there's a piece of property currently underutilized farmland that stands in the way, I believe, through eminent domain or a negotiated purchase. We can repurpose that acreage for the greater good. Rosemary's fingernails dug into her palm. She forced herself to remain quiet. Lockwood went on about projected revenues, improvements to local roads, and potential new jobs, painting a picture of unstoppable progress. When he finished, a few of his supporters, likely business acquaintances, clapped. Then the council invited Rosemary to speak. She stood, her heart pounding. The sound of her boots against the tile seemed unnaturally loud. Grady and Jonah watched, breath held. In her denim jacket and simple blouse, she looked like the embodiment of the land itself, worn strong. Undetermined, she cleared her throat. My name is Rosemary Walker, owner of the Walker Farm. Some of you know me and my family's history in Sweetwater. That land isn't just dirt and crops. It's a lifeline, a gathering place, a piece of our heritage. The idea that it's underutilized ignores the generations who have fed their families with its produce, and the recent harvest market we held shows it's as vital now as it ever was. As Rosemary continued, her voice gained a steadiness, born from knowing the truth of her words. My father, William Walker, expanded the farm, hoping it would remain a pillar of Sweetwater. We've let people gather apples for free when budgets were tight, allowed children to experience how food grows. The barn might have been old, but it was never useless. With the help of volunteers, we just repaired it, turning it into a community center for local artisans. We're planning more events. This land isn't going to waste, it's becoming a hub. She paused, meeting each council member's gaze in turn. Mr. Lockwood's plan might bring jobs, but it would destroy something money can't replace. And if you speak to folks in this room, you'll find that the farm means more than dollars and cents. Right on cue, a small procession of Sweetwater residents lined up to address the council. Mabel spoke about how hosting a farmer's market at Walker Farm boosted her bakery's sales and gave aspiring bakers a new venue. Marcus Henderson explained the historical significance, describing how the Walker family had once bailed out struggling neighbors by letting them glean leftover crops. The retired county official underscored how eminent domain was never meant for corporate gain, but for genuine public needs. Schools, hospitals, highways that benefited the entire community. Finally, Grady stepped up, Jonah holding Barley at the back. He felt a twinge of nerves. He wasn't from Sweetwater, after all. Just a newcomer, but he knew firsthand what that farm had done for him and Jonah in so little time. "I'm Grady Armstrong," he began, voice humble. "I came here for a temporary carpentry job, but this place became more than work. It became a home for me and my son. If you uproot the Walker farm, you're not just erasing an old building, you're erasing the possibility of what it can continue to offer." Some people in the audience applauded softly. Rosemary offered him a small smile of gratitude from her seat, and Jonah looked up, beaming with pride. Lockwood, sensing the momentum swaying against him, tried to counter with more talk of financial incentives. He produced glossy brochures illustrating modern business parks. But as he spoke, the room's energy grew chillier, unimpressed by the polished but distant images. One of the council members, an older woman with steel-gray hair, leaned forward to address Lockwood. "Mr. Lockwood," she said, "it's clear you have experience with these projects, but the job of this council is to preserve the interests of its citizens, not just chase revenue. From what we've heard today, the Walker farm is indeed utilized by this community." She scanned the crowd. "We'll deliberate on this carefully, but eminent domain for private commercial development is not something we take lightly." A ripple of relief moved through the room. Lockwood's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more, acknowledging the futility of pushing at that moment. The council members thanked everyone for their time, and the meeting adjourned. Grady breathed out, not realizing he'd been holding his breath. It wasn't a final victory, but it was a powerful statement that Sweetwater stood with Rosemary. In the days after this council meeting, the tension around the Walker farm began to ease. Though this council hadn't issued a formal decision on Lockwood's proposal, the general consensus was that forcibly seizing the farmland wasn't justified. Lockwood, for his part, seemed to recede into the background. Rumor had it he was pursuing properties elsewhere, ones whose owners were far less prepared for a fight. On a crisp morning just past harvest season, Grady and Jonah arrived at the farm for what had become a new routine, helping with chores, finishing the last bits of barn renovations, and simply sharing a sense of home. Barley bounded out, barking excitedly, while Rosemary waved from the porch with a coffee mug in hand. Morning, she called, her tone lighter than usual. "I was thinking we might clear some of the brush behind the orchard, maybe start preparing for winter." "Unless you had other plans, whatever you need," Grady replied, stepping out of the truck. Jonah immediately darted off to find the chickens, greeting them as if they were old friends. Grady watched his son with a fond smile, reflecting on how much Jonah had changed in the weeks they'd been here. Less restless, more open and grounded. They spent the morning pruning and clearing undergrowth, sweat rolling down their backs despite the cool weather. Rosemary recounted childhood memories of collecting fallen pecans in the orchard and chasing rabbits through the fields. Grady shared small anecdotes about Jonah's mother, detailing how she used to dream of owning a place like this one day. It felt oddly comforting to talk about his wife in the open air, with someone who understood that longing for a lost loved one. At midday, they paused, leaning against a stack of cut branches. She hesitated, then took a step closer, the corners of her lips curving into a gentle smile. "I'm glad," she whispered, "because I don't want you to leave." Grady's heart thudded. All his life after losing his wife, he'd clung to the notion that if he kept moving, he wouldn't have to face the emptiness. But now that emptiness felt filled by something new, belonging perhaps. "We're not going anywhere," he murmured, and the look in Rosemary's eyes told him that might be the best thing he'd ever said. Later that evening, as the sky blazed orange and pink over the sweeping fields, they shared dinner on the farmhouse porch. Jonah recounted the day's adventures to Barley, who lay sprawled contentedly under the table. The air was filled with the quiet promise of a future in which, for once, staying put seemed infinitely more appealing than running away. In the end, standing beneath the sturdy beams of the rebuilt barn, Grady and Rosemary watched as the sun set over the victorious fields of Sweetwater Valley. The ruthless developer had finally retreated, defeated not just by hidden truths, but by the strength of neighbors' loyalty and old-fashioned grit. For Grady, it wasn't just about repairing a barn. It was about restoring faith in family friendship and the values he'd cherished all his life. Rosemary had not only saved her farm, but rediscovered her trust in people and pride in her heritage. This wasn't simply a battle for land. It was a fight for what makes America great: hard work, integrity, and community spirit. It's a reminder that even when the odds seem impossible, determination, honesty, and a little courage can rewrite any story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Did Grady and Rosemary's story remind you of challenges you've overcome? What would you have done in their place? Share your comments below and join the conversation about the timeless values that truly define us. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories.